Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. We're your hosts, Nick Fenagoni
and Tanya Marco-Viedo. Our Queer Spirit Podcast spotlights queer artists, healers, practitioners, activists, and beings
who share their work and magic with our LGBTQIA, two-spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming communities and the collective.
Our guest today is Gina Breedlove, she, they, Grace. Gina is an author, grief doula, sound healer, vocalist, and composer from the People's Republic of Brooklyn, New York. Gina is an oracle for the medicine of grace and grief and travels the world sharing the good news of grief letting as a path to liberation.
Today, Gina shares her story of coming to sound as a healing tool for moving and releasing the energies of grief through the mind, body, and heart. We then move into a round-robin circle and explore the ingredients of a grief soup: grounding, clearing, and calling in. The three of us talk about our own experiences and then share the practices together for working with grief in these magical and healing ways.
To learn more, find her at ginabreedlove.com. That's GINABREEDLOVE.com.
Welcome, everyone. We're here today with Gina Breedlove, and we're going to be talking about the power of sound for healing and transforming grief. And before we begin our interview and our conversation today, let's just start with a grounding. So just taking time wherever you are to find a safe space to either close your eyes or take a soft gaze if that feels good, and just feel your breath in your body. And feeling your body supported by the earth underneath you. And as we tune into the earth, just acknowledging all the elements of the earth, the air, the fire, the water, and spirit, and all the plants and minerals and animals where we are. Acknowledging the native lands where we are, wherever you are, listeners. And I myself am in Ohlone and Ramaytush territory, and Tanya Mark is in Tongva, Kizh, and Chumash territory. And Gina, would you like to name the lands where you are?
Yes, I'm in Creek territory.
Beautiful, thank you. And just calling in all of our ancestors, wise and well, queer ancestors, transcestors, and those who have gone before us, especially in this conversation about grief today, as we remember those who have passed, and all the other ways that grief shows up in our life. Thank you for grounding with us today. Thank you, Gina, for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, we're so excited and so grateful to share some time with you today. It just feels already so filled with warmth and this beautiful ease of molasses, this slow ease of molasses, right? So super grateful that you're here. I would love to hear, or we would love to hear, our listeners, Queer Spirit, our community would love to hear, perhaps if you could begin by sharing a bit about your personal queer story and how you first came to sound as a healing practice for grief letting.
Oh, thank you for the question. I have been consciously sounding into my body since I was 6 years old. And I'd have to say 5. And it was a ritual, an intrinsic ritual that I would do to protect my spirit, my soul. I would use the vibration to cover myself. You know, I had a very conscious understanding that it was holding me in some way, the sound of my voice, my singing, my humming, protecting my interior life while harm was happening to my body. And so I'd been doing that, yes, from about 5. I was at risk often for abuse from an older cousin. And so it was something that I started to lean into, almost like a shield of vibration. really, when I look back and think about it. But I move with, am graced by a spirit that I call Grace, that has been revealed to me as Grace. And I heard Grace's voice very distinctly when I was 6. And I would discern from Grace's voice and my own by the clarity of guidance and instruction. And they were, in my 6-year-old mind, clearly an adult, because of the grounded and present nature of the presence. And sometimes now, as I turn toward my 60th year in this realm, I think of Grace as a once and future me, you know? And when Grace shows up, and has been showing up since I was 5. But as I became a holder and healer of holders, Grace started showing up more and more. And she has a language that when I speak it, I understand what is being said, but then I lose it. I lose the threads of it. But inside of that language, there are no words for some things. So I have come to understand that Grace is an energy that has never known colonization. So, yeah. So my first conscious memory, I was 6 years old. And I remember the day, it's because this is the day my mama left my family. And I had helped her downstairs with her things. And I stood on this doorstep in Brooklyn, where I'm from, Lenape territory. And I watched her drive away with someone I'd never seen. And I heard Grace say, "Sing, Gina, sing." And it got me off the doorstep where I think I was for hours. Back in the day in Brooklyn, you had to go upstairs when the street lights came on. And the street lights came on. And I was still anchored. And I heard Grace say, "Sing." So I started singing the Delphonics. It was 1971. Lala means I love you. And I sang that to myself all the way up to my room that I shared with my sibs. And I laid in bed and I sang and cried for this impossible feeling that was way too big for my tiny body. So that was my introduction to sound, to music, to the feeling of my own voice as a healing modality, first with myself.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It really gives us a really visceral idea and depiction of that experience for you. And I like this idea of sound being like a shield, but also like a balm. Like it feels like it was really a balm for your younger self and all the different feelings that were coming up of what was happening for you in that moment when your mom was leaving. I also really like this idea of this future self, but maybe an alternate self, a self from the future or a self from an alternate reality that hasn't known colonization and that kind of thing, really tapping into those ideas.
Yeah, yeah, or a past self. I mean, Grace has told me very clearly that all of us have an ancestor that has never known colonization, colonizer, or being colonized. So, I do so much work to source my medicine from that place as much as possible. I am at the effect of, the container I live in, and in ritual, I reach back, 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 back.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciated you naming the superpowers of sound and grace, right? And the way in which they were vibrations and in ways in which they kept you protected during times in which you experienced harm. And I also appreciate you naming harm and the medicine of naming harm and the frequency that it puts out there. And we can name it. And each time we name it, it really does send such a potent frequency out there. And so I really appreciate how you have embraced grace in such a beautiful way. It's very potent. So thanks for sharing about that.
Thank you, Tanya.
Gentle reminder, it's Tanya Mark, actually. Yes.
Oh, thank you, Tanya Mark. Thank you.
So, Gina, I know a big part of your practice, and almost it feels like a mission that you're bringing to the world, is this idea of encouraging people to practice circles of grief and what you call kitchen table grief circles. And I wonder if you can share with our listeners what that idea or concept is for you.
Thank you. My work became about grief letting rituals years ago. I'm a vocalist and a composer as well. And folk would just cry at my concerts. And it didn't matter what I was singing about, just moving the grief, just And I remember feeling, I actually didn't know how to feel about that. I started trying to rearrange my sets and take songs out of sets. And my colleagues, my comrades, my fellow musicians were like, yeah, don't do that. Just bring what you bring and let folk have the experiences they want to experience. And so understanding that my voice particularly had that gift of helping folk to locate grief in their bodies. And so that led to, I mean, it's a much longer story, but fast forwarding to studying the work of Sabantu Somé, who did not use the language of grief doula. In fact, I haven't heard anyone else use that language, and she did. She traveled all over the world teaching people how to grieve. And it was incredible, vital, vibrant work and brilliant work. And so, yeah, I went to one of her sessions when I started doing grief work, working with grief in like 2012, I think it was, and learned some things about holding containers around moving grief and ritual around moving grief. And so that developed over time. One-on-one work, circle work. I lived in the Bay for a while. I started working at the Women's Cancer Resource Center in Oakland. And then that led to expansiveness around what I had access to, where I could bring these rituals, knowing that the weight of grief gets caught and it can create more disease and challenge. And then just moving forward into offering this medicine, started thinking about ways to make it accessible to folk, because I wasn't meeting a lot of people doing this work and even trying to train folk how to do the work in the ways that I was doing it. But I thought about ways that folk could do it with each other, and carefully crafted containers, like really, guided into and out of a ritual of witnessing your community, of witnessing someone in your home, of witnessing friends, like just getting together from 3 or 10 people, as long as you put the norms in place and honored them. Like there are very, very clear guides to how to hold the container and how to show it for each other. And so the kitchen table grief circles came from that knowing.
Heck yeah. I'm like, bring it, Gina, bring it. I'm hearing like all of these medicines of so potent, like the medicine of circle, the medicine of community, the medicine of having consent, the medicine of agreement, the medicine of alignment, and how potent all of those ingredients can be in navigating grief, right? And the way in which grief shows up. So thank you for dropping that. We thought we'd get into it and maybe spend a little bit of time exploring some ingredients and medicines of grief. Maybe that each of us kind of practice in our own way, ingredients of a grief soup, if you will. And we thought maybe we could get into, each of us could we could each share about an ingredient, and then maybe we could, drop in a little bit of practice for our listeners and invite our listeners into practice. How does that feel for you all? Nick, Gina, y'all on board with that?
Feels
That
good.
sounds beautiful.
Well, I mean, can we just start off with grounding? And Nick, I'm so curious when you hear grounding and grief, or grief and grounding, or any iteration of that, like what shows up for you in your practice and how do you work
Yeah.
with it?
Yeah. So for me, when I hear grounding, grounding for me is a practice that I start at the beginning of any ritual, no matter what the ritual is. And also, as our listeners know, we do a kind of grounding practice at the beginning of our episodes. And any of you who attend the circles that Tanya, Mark, and I offer, we do grounding at the beginning of those as well. And it's just a way to sort of get present and be in our bodies. But particularly when it comes for grounding around grief, I think that, especially in my work as a psychotherapist, I do tend to hold a lot of grief. And so I do personal grounding of the space. For me, drumming is really grounding, especially for grief that can sort of, depending on what energies come up with grief. But grief can sometimes really knock you off your center. And so for me, grounding really helps me get my roots deep, whether I'm drumming myself or just hearing drumming. So that's one of my grounding practices. How about you, Gina?
Well, I find these days that sort of stay in a space where I'm anchoring, I guess would be, or straddling worlds or realms, or I'm generally channeling these days, particularly. I'm always working right now, like always on a plane to go and hold, or just I'm doing a lot of grief letting work right now. And so I sort of stay in those spaces. And so I'm constantly grounding while I'm doing it. feeling my feet on the floor, feeling myself supported by the earth, sending my roots down. I work a lot with the physical body, imagining that my vagus nerve, the longest nerves in the body, the vagal nerves are moving through the body and then moving through my body and into the soil of wherever I am, of wherever I'm holding space. And that will ground me in the moment and I feel connected to place. And so that's one of the ways that I do it.
Oh, I'm like just getting so lost in both of your shares and all of that medicine that you both are dropping. Thank you both. The first thing that comes to my body around grounding, I guess it's the witch and practitioner and medicine person in me, is the element of earth. So immediately upon hearing the word grounding, the element of earth. So anytime I can be in nature, connect to nature, acknowledge nature, that's one way. Humming, I know we're also exploring, in sound. Humming is also this way of bringing its presence into my body and system and allowing me to really, become present to, acknowledging where my feet or structure are making contact with the earth. Oh, yeah. I like the idea of activating all the senses around grounding as well, because we're really talking about a medicine that can be, useful when to be present, to bring us back from a place, to anchor, to be safe. So, yeah, such a potent medicine. And I love smudges such as Palo Santo, white sage, cedar, rosemary. Those also feel very grounding. So anytime I can work with them, whether it's in tea, smudge, having it simmer over the stove and the aroma to, taking over the space. So yeah. Ooh. It makes me feel like, should we practice? Should we do a little grounding? I'd love to share my on the go grounding practice with y'all. All right. So inviting you to just take your hands and rub them together. If it feels good, you can soften your gaze, close your eyes. And as you do so, connecting to your breath. This is my on the go grounding of just activating each of our senses. So first acting and asking, what do I hear? Is it the rubbing of the hands together, the external noises that may be happening, and the internal ones? What can I touch? If rubbing your hands doesn't feel good, perhaps reaching out and touching an object and being mindful of what you're touching as a means of becoming present. What do we smell? Taking a nice, good inhale. What are the fragrances that we notice? Asking in those fragrances to help bring us back to a sense of presence and anchoring within our bodies, our systems. What do we taste? Perhaps we've just taken a sip of some hydration. Maybe we've just had some nourishment in some kind of way. Maybe it's we open our mouths and just kind of take in, like, what is it that we taste, as a way, again, of bringing us present in the moment. And we also invite that spidey sense in, our sixth sense. Can we take a moment to ask ourselves, what do we sense? Internally, externally, what are we sensing? Maybe bringing those hands back together and rubbing them back together and bringing in gratitude, 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 and all of this beautiful grounding. And thank you both for exploring with me.
I actually forgot to name, but was noticing as you were guiding us through it, I was feeling my body and remembering my necklace that I'm wearing, which is hematite. And that's another stone that I like to use for grounding, which is really beautiful and powerful for me for that. I'm going to be a little queer and wonder if we can mix up our order and do calling in first. Because for me, I feel like calling in is a good thing to do before clearing, like to call in guidance or support. And at least that's kind of my way of interpreting calling in. But I wonder, Gina, if you want to share a little bit first about some of the ways that you do calling in, or what calling in is for you and your practice, or what language you use around that.
Thank you, Nick. Calling in. Again, I want to share that it is a constant practice, like throughout the day. I am calling in discernment, I'm calling in discernment. I'm calling in presence for myself, that I might do deep listening, that I might listen more than speak sometimes so that I can be guided. I'm calling in or affirming the presence of grace and, those who walk with me, my people, as I think of them, my posse. I'm calling in spaciousness. Yeah, some spaciousness to hold myself in such a way that I don't get caught in the centrifugal force of the present moment, the spin, as it were. So those are the things that I call in, and I call them in all the time, not just when I'm doing ritual. Really, because these days, Nick, everything is feeling like ritual. You can ritualize, of course, everything, and I feel like when I open my eyes, my feet are on the floor. Like I'm in this constant place right now with calling in, with grounding, because of what time it is on the clock of the world, as Grace Lee Boggs would say.
Tanya Mark, what is calling in for you?
Thank you for that share, Gina. Lots of medicine being dropped there. And thanks for the ask, Nick. Calling in to me it's prayer. It's calling upon my ancestors. I have some prayers that have used, gosh, for many, many years. They just feel, I think prayer is just such a potent medicine in connecting. So calling in to me is also connecting to spirit, to source, to the divine. And so in doing so, a lot of prayer for me. Candle magic is another way in which I call in. And connecting to nature is another calling in for me. Hands in the land is the expression. So feeling very connected and calling in that way. So yeah. How about you, Nick?
Yeah. Well, one of we talked a little bit about different languaging or terminology. One of the terms that in my tradition we would use is invocation, right? So at the beginning of a ritual, we do invocations to the spirits of the land, whether that be the native people who are the spirits of the land or the elemental spirits of the land. I feel particular affinity to the fae beings as the creatures of the land or the spirits of the land who really tend to all the elements. And yeah, and then also doing any kind of invocation to whatever god or goddess or deity or, grace, as in Gina's case, just calling that in. And whether that be with us all the time, but calling it in a particular way for a particular working or practice or circle, whatever that is. So, would you like for me to share a little bit about some of the ways that I would do an invocation or calling in?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, I was feeling called to do an invocation to Kuan Yin since we are talking about grief and really feeling that Kuan Yin is a beautiful deity being to call in for compassion and mercy and a sweetness that can be beneficial to holding space for grief. And I also like Kuan Yin because Kuan Yin is both depicted in different cultures around the world as both male and female, and so holds both qualities and feels very queer for me. So that's part of my resonance with Kuan Yin. So we've done the grounding in the ways that we do it, in the ways that we know, and just taking a time to either come back to whatever image comes to you when you think about the energy of compassion, whether that be Kuan Yin or some other being or symbol or image, just calling that into your space, to your eye, to your heart, to your body. And so I would, again, using sound, sometimes I use a drum or a rattle or a bell to call in and just call in and asking that energy of Kuan Yin, you who are the being of compassion and mercy, to bring your sweet medicine and your balm to soothe all of us, our grief, our wounds, our hearts in these times. And just bringing in the energies and the qualities of that with a simple humming, whatever humming feels good for you. But I'll just do some humming that's coming to me right now to bring in Kuan Yin. Mm. Mm. Oh. Oh. Mm. Welcome compassion and welcome Kuan Yin.
Mhm. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
We have another ingredient to get into, don't we? I believe we wanted to look at and maybe explore the medicine of clearing today. I'm so curious. Gina, or if I may take the lead on this one and share clearing as it pertains to grief on this one. Clearing to me is about this idea of intentionally prepping the body to remove what no longer serves. So I find a lot of clearing. I do a lot of clearing throughout the day through movement and connecting to my breath. So connecting to my breath can be working with a slow inhale and exhale to regulate the system, as well as using an exhale with an SH or an S or a big audible. I also think of clearing as in being a witch. I do a lot of sweeping. So the literal act of sweeping in my space, outdoor of my space, also is very clearing. It's saying, let's clear up, let's slough off, let's clean up what no longer serves. So love all things clearing. Same thing with smudges for me too. Smudges are also very grounding, clearing, fulfill the combo. So I can work with smudge to also help clear spaces and my energy fields. What about you, Nick? How do you clear?
Yeah, I think again coming back to the elements, using the elements for clearing, especially air and water for clearing, thinking about cleansing with water and air, whether it's taking a ritual bath or standing in the wind. I think, Gina, I may have heard you mention in another interview that you like standing in the wind as a way of clearing.
I do. I do.
Yeah, growing up in Southern California, for any of those who are down there or have lived down there, there's the Santa Ana winds, which are these warm, dry winds that come over the desert down into the city. And usually around the fall, I think, is when they come in and they shake off all the trees and release the dead branches and that kind of thing. So that's one of the ways that I think about clearing. Yeah. So, Gina, how about you? What are some of the ways that you clear, or what is clearing for you?
Well, clearing is shifting any energetic debris that may be in a space, or if I am graced to be working with someone, the person in front of me, what they may have walked in with. Just moving through the world. I'm a New Yorker, right? So you cannot walk from the train to your house without all of this energy on your body clinging to you, no matter how fierce your spiritual hygiene is, right? It's New York, right? Yeah, every corner there's a happening. I feel that way about New Orleans as well. There are some places in the world where, yeah. So I think of it, Nick, as just, clearing the space to prepare. Or, I clear out, if I'm traveling, I'll clear a hotel room. I'll clear the space where I'm about to hold space. And I use, much like Tanya Mark, I use smoke for that. I use smudging for that often. I'll use sprays now. I've been making my own smudge sprays, using Palo Santo or Osha root, whatever is called for. I love to work with the medicine of Rue, which is called the herb of grace, and doing a tincture decoction for months and months and months, and then carrying those sprays with me. So I'll spray into the space, into corners, certainly my own body, the person in front of me. And often I'll use sound as well. In a affirmative prayer is how I think of it. as in not just opening the space between us. I declare and I decree, right? Like opening the space, putting my will in the sound and opening the space between us for the work that we're about to do. Welcoming those who have come before you, the body that held the body, 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 sourcing back and sourcing forward. And those who walk with me. And in the invitation is that those folk that will be in communion, right? My folk will talk to your folk. They'll give us information. Where's grief in your body? Where should I focus my sound in your body? Being guided by that. And then the sealing of the space, like sealing it shut, is another kind of clearing, making sure that we leave the space. My grandma used to say, leave it better than you found it. I don't know about that part because I think it's already like rather stunning, but absolutely closing and clearing and shifting the work that we have done. Right. And so moving that work along as well, and the sound of my voice in that practice.
Beautiful. So, in the sake of and community of sharing, Gina, I wonder if you can share with us a clearing practice for our listeners that we can all practice together around clearing, either clearing grief or clearing energy, whatever feels right for you to share with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. So, in the spirit of clearing grief, which I think of as an ongoing ritual and one that takes some time, right? And so, to clear grief from the body, which then in turn will support the clearing of it from a space, I invite folk to soften or close their eyes and begin inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth at your own pace, honoring your access needs, right? So inhaling through your nose as deeply as you are able, exhaling through the mouth. And if you have access to sound, after a bit, exhaling with some sound. So I love to work with the vowel, right? So inhaling through the nose and exhaling, if you are able. A long exhale on the breath, circling back at the end of the breath to continue. And then when you feel ready, coming to quiet and noticing how the breath made you feel, noticing your body, noticing the back of your skull, your back body, noticing your shoulders, all as you are able, all by invitation, noticing the backs of knees and calves and the soles of feet as you are able, always going with what your body is available, what is available to your body, to you. And then after taking that journey around your body, that noticing of your breath, then locating yourself with your breath again while inhaling through your nose and exhaling. And then turning toward and leaning into what wants to be known, what may want to be let. And here, often inside of the memory, inside of what needs to be or wants to be known, there's a part of you, a moment, an age, a moment in time, like who has stepped forward with something that wants to be held. How old are you in this moment? These are the questions I invite folk to ask themselves. Always with generosity, always with a gentleness. I have taught myself to speak to myself the way I speak to my daughter. So how do we speak to people that we love, our four-leggeds, those beings that move through life with us? And then learning how to and turning that same care on ourselves in our query, what wants to be known, what wants to be held. And if something has presented itself for you to do that right now, then please imagine holding yourself close the way you would hold a familiar or a love. And still inhaling at your own pace and bringing the back into your breath. Noticing if there is any grief here. And can you move it through your body at this time? And if you are able, how does that show up? Does it show up with tears? Does it show up with sound? Do you want to move your body now to your favorite song? Do you want to hold yourself close with your hands on your own body if that is possible? Letting grief in all the ways that you are able. And then taking the time it takes, allowing that. And when you are ready, coming back to locating yourself with your breath, inhaling through your nose, exhaling through your mouth. As you feel able and ready and called, inhaling through your nose again and exhaling to the end of your breath. Placing hand on your own body, the base of your throat, over your beating heart, maybe on your lap, maybe by your side. Let your body guide and dictate the choices you make here. And then when you are ready, opening your eyes, if your eyes have been closed, or soft on your own body. And I like to call folk into a practice of resting your eyes on something beautiful. I'm a person who loves crystals and stones, and I have pictures of my beloveds everywhere. And I live in a home where there are lots of windows and there's lots of green outside. So, in resting your eyes on something beautiful, what you find beautiful, doing that, and then this affirmation of, I am that. I am that.
Oh my gosh, Gina, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And gosh, this has just been such a sweet, warming shared time together. And typical queer spirit style, we like to end our sessions with gratitude. And it kind of came upon us and it came through me that perhaps we could do that by each reciting a verse from the beautiful medicine that you mentioned earlier, Gina, from the Delphonics and the medicine of la, 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 la. So we thought that we could go around to each one of us and we could share that. And doing so, we're closing by thanking our lands and stewards of those lands, our elements, all of our tools and guides and practices, and for the medicine and frequency that us, the three of us coming together today, and the frequency that that's sending out to our community and collective. So thank you to each of you. And I'll kick us off. How's that? La, 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 la. We love you.
La 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 means I love you.
La 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 means we love you. Thank you. Thank
Awesome.
you. So, Gina, before
Ashe.
we let you go,
Mm.
can you share with our listeners a little bit more about where they can find you and your work and your beautiful book?
Thank you so much for the question. Well, my site, ginabreedlove.com, and I am doing I begin tonight a series of holding every Tuesday for the Working Families Party. It is going to be 6:30 to 7:45 Eastern Standard Time. Meditations around care and respite. And we'll do it every Tuesday, even including election night. We are noting that folk are needing some extra support right now. So I start that this evening, and that's a virtual offering. And then I'll be doing Saturday morning offerings as well, starting in October with Sounds True, which is where my book is housed. The Vibration of Grace, Sound Healing Rituals for Liberation is on Sounds True. And I have also recorded the audio book, and I get emails from folks saying that the audio is much easier to follow the rituals by, which of course that makes sense. And so, yeah, you can find me there. I'm going to be doing a bunch of virtual things, sound healing circle rooms until the start of the year. So between now and January.
Mm-hmm. Yes, if anyone has a chance, I definitely recommend those. I did I think it was 21 days of sound healing in January, I believe, which was a really beautiful practice. So thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you.
for joining us. Thank you.
Resources that we share today can be found in our show notes and at thequeerspirit.com.
You're invited to follow our show on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, much love and blessings. Aho.